Hey guys, today we're going to work on complex numbers, and we're first going to talk about what is a complex number. Well, first of all, we have to understand what an imaginary number is. So basically it's this simple. When you have a negative under a radical, we handle it with what's called the imaginary unit. Radical negative 1 is known as I. So when you have radical negative 4, that would be radical negative 1 times radical 4. Radical 4 is of course 2, and radical negative 1 is I. So I times 2 is 2I. It's just a way in which we handle having negatives under a radical. If you have radical negative 7, that once again is negative 1, radical negative 1 times radical 7. Since radical 7 is not a perfect square, this is I times radical 7. And you wouldn't have to do anything else with it. So let's see if we can find the zeros for this function. Finding the zeros means we let y equal 0. So if 0 equals x squared minus 9x plus 21, this does not factor. So we'll identify our a, which is 1. It's the number in front of the x squared. B is negative 9, and C is 21. So we're going to plug these three numbers into the quadratic formula. So it would say negative 9 plus or minus radical negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 21 all over 2 times 1. So that's 9 plus or minus radical 81, right? Negative 9 squared minus all the stuff after the minus sign is 84 over 2. Now 81 minus 84 is radical negative 3. Now again, the handle in negative, the handle in negative under a radical, we change radical negative 3 to radical negative 1 times radical 3. Radical negative 1 is I, so it's 9 plus or minus I radical 3 over 2. Now let's do some operations with complex numbers. So this is over on page, that was on page 142. This is on page 91. On page 91, let's start with 125. 125 says you have 12 plus 4i plus negative 6 plus 11i. We simply are going to combine like terms. 12 and negative 6 add up to 6. 4i and 11i is 15i. Now this is a complex number because the 6 is a real number and the 15i, because it has an I, is imaginary. And here's how you graph complex numbers. On our graph paper, the x-axis is the regular old real number system. The y-axis is known as the y-I-axis. It's the imaginary number system. So 6 is a real number, so we go to the right because it's positive, 6 units. And then 15 is imaginary, so we're going to go up 15 and put a dot. We make a vector, it's called, which is just an arrow from the origin to this dot. This is called 6 plus 15i. Now, if the 6 was negative, we'd go to the left on the x-axis. If the imaginary number was negative, we'd go down on the y-axis. Let's try number 126. What if you have a subtraction problem? 126 says 1 plus 15i minus 13 plus 5i. Well, just like in algebra, we're going to change every subtraction problem by distributing the negative, the minus sign, into this parenthesis. So this is really 1 plus 15i plus negative 13 minus 5i. And then we do the same thing as in the last question. So if you wanted to pause the video and try it on your own and then play it out, it's a good idea. 1 and negative 13 is negative 12. 15i minus 5i is 10i. Make our x, or real number, axis. Our yi, our imaginary number, axis. Negative 12 goes on the real number, and 10i goes up the imaginary, and then you make your vector from the origin. And we should label this negative 12 plus 10i. What about, let's try 134. Let's get into some multiplication. 134. So the only ones you graph are the addition ones. 134 says we have negative 11i times negative 2 plus I. And again, no different than algebra, we're going to distribute. Negative 11i times negative 2 is 22i. Negative 11i times I is negative 11i squared. I squared is negative 1. So this is really 22i minus 11 times negative 1, which is 22i plus 11. And let's try one more. Let's try number 140. 140 says you have 140 is 6 minus 3i squared. Be very careful. Do not just square the numbers you're looking at. When you square a binomial, you should write it out twice so that we can double distribute. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times negative 3i is negative 18i. Negative 3i times 6 is another negative 18i. Negative 3i times negative 3i. Do this in 3 steps. Negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 3 is 9. I times I is I squared. Remember, I squared is negative 1. So this is 36. We can combine these. Minus 36i plus 9 times negative 1 will be negative 9. 36 minus 9 is 27. 27 minus 36i is our final answer. So give these questions a try, guys, and let me know if you have any questions.